Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to start right in talking about the vertebrae and the parts of the vertebrae. So we have the body here. We have two transverse processes. We have a spinous process going posteriorly. And then we have these facets that allow for attachment of either other vertebrae or we may have facets that attach ribs to the vertebrae, forming that thoracic cage. There we go. Two vertebrae in this cervical region that are really important are your atlas and your axis, which I talked about before. So the atlas is the very first vertebrae. It has these regions that articulate directly with the occipital condyle. So these fossa here articulate with the occipital condyle, allowing the occipital condyle to sit directly on this vertebrae. And then we have the axis, which is the second vertebrae. The axis has this structure called the dens. The dens actually sits right here, and the atlas can swivel around the dens. So the atlas articulates here, and it swivels around this dens, allowing us to shake our head no. Another thing that all vertebrae in the cervical region have, and I'm going to go back just 1 second, well, in a second, all cervical vertebrae have transverse foramina or foramen. So you see this foramen here and this foramen, and then we have the vertebral foramen. All vertebrae have the vertebral foramen. This is where the spinal cord moves, but transverse foramen are specific to cervical vertebrae only. And so you can see the transverse foramen here. Here you don't see them, but there's a transverse foramen right in this area over here, and there's another one on this side over here. So all cervical vertebrae have both transverse and vertebral foramen. That's one way to identify them. They're much smaller than your thoracic or your lumbar vertebrae as well. Here is the thoracic vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae have just that one foramen for the spinal cord, but we have these facets, which I talked about before, for our ribs. And then, of course, we have facets to attach to the other vertebrae. When you look at this, a lot of times people struggle with separating the thoracic and the lumbar vertebrae, but if you look at this, this kind of looks like a giraffe when you look. I mean, just kind of, let your mind wander a little. And so thoracic vertebrae, I always think of as like giraffe. They typically have the longer spinous process, which is like the long neck, and then they have those little ears, kind of, which are the facets actually. So it kind of reminds me of a giraffe, and that's how I remember thoracic from the lumbar. So lumbar vertebrae have very pointed spinous processes, much shorter. They have a much bigger body than thoracic vertebrae. Lumbar vertebrae don't have the facets on the transverse regions because they don't attach to the ribs. Lumbar vertebrae, to me, kind of look like a cow. So much larger, the ears are bigger, and they kind of, a cow lumbers around, so that's how I always remember lumbar vertebrae. And then we have the sacrum and that little tiny structure called the coccyx. The coccyx is the tailbone. Sacrum forms from multiple vertebrae fusing together. And so you can see each of the regions. There's the canal, the vertebral canal right there. There's also tiny little holes, these foramen, that allow for nerves to move through. And then we have the coccyx, which is a little tiny tailbone. The coccyx doesn't have the same canal that the other bones have. So the thoracic cage then is formed by the thoracic vertebrae, which we looked at already, the sternum, and the ribs. So I'm going to go to the next slide to show you the ribs and sternum because it has a nice picture. So here you can see the different types of ribs. So we have true ribs and then we have false ribs. True ribs are ribs that attach directly to the sternum. So here's the first rib. There's hyaline cartilage that attaches the rib to the sternum. This goes all the way down. Here you can see that attaches, that one attaches, and this one attaches. So these are all called true ribs because they all attach directly to the sternum. False ribs are ribs that either have no attachment, so they're floating, or they attach to the cartilage, the hyaline cartilage. So if you look here, this one attaches to the, this rib attaches to the cartilage above. This one attaches to the cartilage above. This one attaches to the cartilage above. So these are all called false ribs. These are also called false ribs, but they're also known as floating ribs because they float. They don't attach to anything. The sternum is composed of 3 parts. It has the manubrium, the body, and then the xiphoid process. And they all fuse together, forming this flattened sternal bone. And this gives a protective cage around our lungs and our heart. So now we're going into the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is composed of 126 bones. And in this skeletal group, we have the limbs, so our appendages, as well as our pectoral girdle and our pelvic girdle. When you look at these pictures, you can see the yellow is the appendicular skeleton, because you remember the green was the axial skeleton. There's more bones in the appendicular skeleton than there are in the axial skeleton, but a lot of the bones have the same name. So this is the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle has the scapula and the clavicle that make it up. It's a very, very small or very light girdle. It doesn't allow for a lot of protection. It's more for flexibility. So it allows for a lot of movement of the upper limbs. The pelvic girdle is going to be much more strong. Here's the clavicle. Really, the main thing I always talk about for the clavicle is that it's that uniquely curved bone, kind of looks like an S. And it has an acromial end and a sternal end. The sternal end is what attaches to the sternum. Oh, sorry. The acromial end is what attaches to the acromion of the scapula. And then here is the scapula. The scapula, or your shoulder bone, shoulder blade, has the acromion where the clavicle is attached to. And then it has multiple spots for muscles to attach, as well as that cavity where the humerus sits in. And then this is just an anterior view of the same scapula, okay? All right, so now let's look at the upper limbs. And the first bone we'll talk about is the humerus. The humerus is the upper arm bone. It forms that brachial region. It is one single bone. The head articulates with the glenoid process or cavity, glenoid fossa, that's what I normally say, the scapula, and the distal end articulates with both the radius and the ulna. So here is that humerus. Here's the head. We have greater and lesser tubercles on the humerus. And then this is the shaft of the tuberous of the humerus. Wow. Down here we have a capitulum and a trochlea. And then if we turn it around, you can see the old cranon fossa. So this is where your old cranon, your elbow, that's where the old cranon fossa or old cranon process actually sits. So here are the forearm or the antebrachial region bones. We have an ulna. The ulna is longer than the radius. The ulna is on the medial aspect of the antebrachial region. The radius is on the lateral aspect. If you've ever remember, if you work in a medical field at all, then you've heard of radial pulses. Where people are feeling by the thumb. That's because that's the side that your radius is on that lateral aspect. On the ulna, we have this large old cranon process that articulates with the old cranon fossa of the humerus. We have this region called the trochlear notch. The trochlear notch is actually what articulates with the trochlea on the humerus. The ulna and radius are held together. There's actually a ligament that surrounds this that you don't see. It's called the annular ligament that holds the radial head to the ulna. So this is the head of the radius. And they articulate, and the radius articulates with the capitulum of the humerus. Here are your hand bones. I'm sorry, I covered this part up. So we start out with the carpals, and we have 8 different carpals. Trapezium at the thumb, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. If we go back over here, we would have scaphoid, lunate, triquetrium, which is actually a triangular shaped bone, and pisiform. Looks like a little pea. Then we have 4 metacarpals. This makes up the palm of the hand. So this is the carpal region or the wrist. This is the palm. And then we have a lot of phalanges. So there's 3 phalanges per finger, 3, 6, 9, 12, and then 2 phalanges for the thumb. So there's 14 phalanges per hand. So there's a lot of bones that make up the appendicular skeleton, but a lot of those bones have the exact same name because we have 14 phalanges per hand, 2 hands. We also have 14 phalanges per foot, and we have 2 feet, which means we have, what, 56 phalanges? That's a lot of phalanges. I'm going to stop on this video because it's already almost to the 14-minute mark, and we'll go for the lower bones in this next video, okay? Bye.